Good afternoon and welcome to the June 9th, 2021 meeting of the Council Study Group that's looking at council terms, engagement, and compensation. Sorry for the delay, but we appreciate everybody being patient with us. We'll go ahead and start the meeting with reviewing the June 4th, 2021 meeting minutes. They were sent out this morning. I apologize. There was a little miscommunication that we didn't get them to you earlier because our secretary gets them done quickly. Anyway, if you've had a chance to take a look at them, are there any questions, concerns, edits, revisions? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved, Nirvana.
Do we have a motion to approve? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
I think that was a delayed aye, not a opposition to the minutes. So we'll call those approved. I'm not going to go into great detail about what we did last meeting. Essentially, we agreed on a proposed compensation adjustment for council that really was essentially averaging the highest three jurisdictions in North Carolina, and then adjusting three expense allowance categories so that we felt like council would be compensated commensurate with the time and effort they put in for essentially a fast-growing city like Raleigh relative to their peer jurisdictions. So that's where we are, and the specific recommendations are in the minutes and are available for review. We'll be on the June 15th council agenda to provide our interim report, which you all are aware of. And I would encourage, to the extent you're available, the agenda is not out yet, so I don't know exactly where we're going to fall, but we should be in the afternoon. And to the extent anyone is available to attend, it will be the first meeting where council returns to the pre-pandemic in-person meetings. So if you're available to come to the council chambers, we'd love to have you on the 15th. We're going to go ahead on some exciting events happened yesterday during the council meeting. And the city attorney is going to give us an update on that, but the council decided to seek we talked about Senate Bill 722 and where that stood, and that would allow council to, it was a statewide bill, so any jurisdiction that needed to adjust their elections because of census data delays could move their elections to March of 2022. Council decided yesterday to ask the General Assembly for what's called a local bill that would apply just to Raleigh's election, asking that the election be delayed until June of 2022. And I'll let the city attorney and Jerry Cohen kind of talk about that to give us an idea of where that went. But one thing I would ask of this group, there may be differences of opinion about that and council's decision, but keep in mind with regard to our work, we are looking at, trying to improve how the city is governed for the next, 40 to 50 years. Although it will impact this council and future elections, depending on what they choose to do with our recommendations, we are not making recommendations for the benefit of this council or specifically for this council. So I just want to try to separate those as we move forward. And I'm sure you all realize that, but I just wanted to make that point. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over. I think if I didn't notice, I think Robin's on. So Robin, if you want to give us kind of a.
Oh, okay. She fixed it. She didn't let me, I wasn't, I didn't have control of my mute. Sorry, I am working on this local bill as which I'm doing two things at the same time. So give me a second.
Do you want us to come back to you? Are you okay? Or do we can let Jerry go? Whatever you're comfortable with.
All right, you can let Jerry go. This is moving pretty fast at the General Assembly here, so let him go.
Okay.
Let me just say one thing is that I will say that there were really only two choices. I know there's a lot of things floating around out there, but Jerry can sort of elaborate on this. We can't just say, oh, we want to have an election in, June or or whatever, that there are dates that we're kind of stuck with. And, we saw that as either being March or November. And so that was sort of our choice. It wasn't a great desire to necessarily not pick anything in between those two, that those were really our choices. So I'll let Jerry go on, and any other questions anybody has for me, I'm glad to answer them.
So we had talked about having Jerry, he was going to give us some information, and I sent his material around to you earlier today too, talking about kind of the difference between, and this relates to our evaluation of how to encourage greater voter engagement and turnout. And one of the issues was election years being on even years versus odd years. And so Jerry provided some information about differences in voter turnout. So I'm going to let him go over that, and he can address anything related to this local bill that he feels that he wants to. So Jerry, with that, please, thanks for being with us again today.
Sure. Thanks very much, Eric and committee members. My presentation has been emailed to members, and for those outside who'd like to see it, I just posted on my Twitter. If you go to GERCOHEN, you'll see a link to my presentation there. If I could figure out how to share it on the screen without disconnecting from the Zoom, I'd do that, but I'm a bit challenged on that. Basically, Senate Bill 722, which would move Raleigh's election till March with any potential runoff till April or May, looks like it's being fast-tracked. It passed the Senate last week and received by the House last night, and it's already been scheduled for a committee meeting at 2:30 this afternoon. So it's entirely possible the House will vote on it tomorrow if things are going at the speed they look like now. So that's one thing there. As Robin mentioned, the city is looking for some potential local legislation that would be different than that, and she'll discuss that later. But basically on turnout, when I put turnout together, looking at the last 7 or 8 years, focused just on Raleigh city voters, which is a bit hard to do from the county data. We put it together based on a current voter snapshot. So turnout from 2014 and 15 is a bit lowballed, but not much. The differences are really quite stark, both in city voters, and another thing we have to look at is when the school board elections were moved from odd to even year. What you'll see here is looking at the October versus November municipal turnout, that the last runoff in 2017 did have slightly higher turnout, maybe by 2 or 3% than the October election. I think that was a runoff for mayor. But and in the primary, where we would look at if the election was in March, the turnout is generally higher than for municipal elections, but it varies a lot based on whether it's a presidential primary or off-year primary. The turnout, for instance, in Raleigh city voters, looking here for the municipal election in 2019, there were 51,000 votes cast in the Raleigh city election. In the March presidential primary, just Raleigh city voters, and I'm just looking at Wake County. Durham has another 1,800 voters, but I've ignored that for this presentation. March primary, 103,000, and in the city bond issue in November of 2020, 246,000. So about 5 times as many voters voted, Raleigh voters, in the general election, the municipal election. Other primaries, though, in the 2018 primary, which had no statewide races, there were only 31,000 voters. In 2014, there were, I'm trying to think, look here, in 2016 presidential, 92,000. So those vary a lot. For the school board, for instance, in the 2011-2013 cycle, when it was staggered terms, there were 110,000 voters that voted in the school district on the 2011 plus 2013 turnout. In 2020, there were 502,000 voters cast votes in the school board election. The school board is seeking a local bill to move its elections back to the odd numbered years, which would likely cut the turnout by 80% or so. Because I'm not sure how to affect voter behavior except in response to the kind of elections that are going on. Basically, some background. Raleigh municipal elections were held in May of odd years, 1947 to 71, with a nonpartisan primary in April to narrow the field if more than twice the number of candidates filed them were to be elected. The General Assembly moved the election to November of the odd year, effective in 1973, with a nonpartisan primary in October. This system was used until 1979, when the City Council, under a Home Rule Charter Amendment, moved the election to October with a runoff in November. I don't have any background on why that happened. School board was changed the same way. School board had a nonpartisan primary. Let's see. As mentioned, the difference between October and November in the odd year is relatively minor, though it's probably a little bit higher in November. It's in conjunction with more municipal elections in Wake County and around the state. A primary, if the city election is in March of 2020, based on past experience with a sort of synergy between primary voters and city voters, we would probably find a turnout higher than either. In a presidential year, it'd be significantly higher. We also found the same thing in Winston-Salem, which moved from odd years to November of even years. In 2013, the last mayoral election in Winston-Salem, in the odd year, there were 15,000 people who voted in the mayoral election. In 2020, in the November mayoral election, there were 119,000 votes cast, which is like 8 times as many voters. And I suspect that would replicate itself elsewhere as well. Again, the primary, an election in the primary like Senate Bill 722 is probably going to result in a turnout somewhere between an odd year and a presidential election. I've got a whole bunch of data in the presentation. You all should have it and you can look at it. And I'd be glad to answer any questions people might have on what the options are, or how to encourage turnout.
Well, thanks, Jerry. So I'll offer up to the group. Do you have questions or comments? Because obviously one of our charges is to address voter turnout, and this is certainly one way to do it. So let me know if people have questions for Jerry.
Yeah, Jerry, I'm curious. One of the things I know we see, generally speaking, with elections is when you have the federal election and you have a lot of people turn out, there's a big drop off down ballot. So your local positions that end up on the same ballot as a federal election might have higher turnout than they would in an off year, but they still have a lower turnout compared to those top of ballot federal elections. I'm assuming that we would see that same pattern kind of replicated within this data, but do you know whether or not that's true off the top of your head? Did you look at that at all?
I did look at that for school board, and what we saw in Wake County in 2016 and 2020. Now, remember I told you there were 500,000 votes cast for school board. That's the actual number of people who cast a ballot in the school board race for their district. there was about a 20% turnout. Wake County turnout was actually about 600,000. So about 20% of the people left the school board ballot blank who voted in the presidential election. But the turnout still was voting for school board 4.5 to 5 times as many as it was in the odd year. So yes, there's a drop off. That's 20%. It seemed to be a similar drop off then to, for instance, soil conservation supervisor, for what that's worth.
We have one of those on our group, so be nice.
Oh, I'm being very nice and respectful. And I
Other
should say that
questions?
this presentation is my opinion, not that of the Board of Elections or its staff.
Having said that, Jerry, the data is the data. And clearly, if everybody's on the same page, more people are showing up. And once the legislature moved the county and the school board off the schedule that the city was on, it robbed a lot of energy into the conversation. I think it's good for the municipal conversation to take place where people can listen, but it is also very good for a good turnout. And so I'm clearly a five-fold increase is pretty impressive.
Right, there's obviously some synergy. Back when the school board was at the same time as the Raleigh and Cary elections, then some people came out for one election and voted the other, and voted in the other, et cetera, but it's dwarfed greatly by the even year turnout. But yes, there's some synergy in that.
Other comments, questions?
Jerry, let me ask you a question about
Sure.
the cost of putting on these elections. So currently, you have to set up for the municipal election separate from all of the other elections. What impact is that as an expense to the city?
Well, I believe Robin said this, and that's my recollection at one previous meeting, that the city budget's about $800,000 to conduct an election in the odd numbered year in conjunction with Cary, because there is some cost sharing. I think Cary pays an additional 200,000 or so. If there was a runoff, that cost would be replicated. Under the contract between the city and the county, if the election were in either March or November of the even numbered year, the cost would be shared between the county and city, just like it was pre-2014 when the school board shared costs. The county shared the costs of the election with the city when the school board election was there. It wouldn't be exactly half, because a ballot style is the particular ballot for your precinct or part of the precinct. And if the municipal elections are in the even numbered year, we would have more different ballots. For instance, in 2020, the city bond issue increased the number of different kinds of ballots, I think from 110 to 130 or something like that. So that does involve some additional costs. I don't quantify it directly, but maybe that might be $10,000 or $20,000 more to offset the $400,000 reduction from cost sharing. So that's the sort of ballpark numbers there. It's a bit more complicated to have a city election with a county, but that's what we had with the bond issue last year, for example.
Well, let me make what may be an obvious point. It won't be the first and probably won't be the last. Council decided yesterday to go this route. So I think we're talking about this, and this was on our agenda in terms of voter turnout. And Robin, you just give me the high sign when you're ready to talk kind of about what the action was. But in terms of our recommendation or not recommendation, I don't know that we at this point need to spend a lot of time on evaluating the whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea, because council has directed staff to pursue this local legislation. I think it may undercut how much time we spend or reduce the amount of need for our discussion on voter turnout and engagement, because I think if they are successful, voter turnout will go up. that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about the issue. And I'm making these points for discussion. I'm not saying that to cut off the discussion or minimize it. But you know, we're kind of getting to where we're talking about the merits of it, and you know, council gets to have the ultimate decision, and they have apparently decided which direction they're going to go in. But Robin, can you give us a little background on kind of what the legislation will actually do in terms of the changes that, assuming it's approved, what those will be it's more than just moving the election to November of 2022 for this time. There's, you know, is it permanent and, or is that the intent? So just kind of give us a little bit of background on it if you can.
Well, I will, and I do think voter turnout is important to the council, and that we had access. Jerry sent his information out, so the council, based on what the data that they were aware of, was that voter turnout is much greater in even years. So, I mean, whether you make a recommendation as to whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, I mean, I do think based on Jerry's presentation, if the group has an opinion about whether that would increase it or not, council would probably appreciate it. The state is moving very, as Jerry indicated, and there are one local bill has already passed, and there's others in the queue. So I have, I think a decision needed to be made, is where we came down, is that there wasn't going to be a lot of time to have a number of weeks or months to wait to make a decision one way or the other. And then as soon as, if the statewide bill passes and the election is moved to March, and the runoff would be in April, then a local bill came out and said, oh, now we want to do it in November, then that would be confusing. I think one thing that the council was very important to them is that sooner rather than later, people would know when they were going to go to the polls to vote. And there was some uncertainty with the statewide bill 722. It's changed a couple of times, like 3 times in the Senate. Didn't know what was going to happen in the House. And so based on that, the need for certainty, the fact that they wanted this group to have a little more breathing room than we were sort of giving you. I was telling you, you know, you got to report out, because if we had to, and we still don't know whether the local bill will pass or not, that if they had to run in March, then things were going to have to move a lot more quickly. They would have to make a decision, probably Jerry thinks August, and about whether there was going to be 4-year terms. And that's particularly if you want to get public engagement. They've got a bond that they would like to pass, and they would like to do the bond campaign. And there are a number of touch points where you can run a bond referendum. So, I mean, I think at the very latest that we could, you know, start the first step, which means you got all your ducks in a row, would be of October. So all of the things that would need to be done, drawing the lines, getting the lines right, doing public engagement with the lines, the additional time made sense. And we thought that we had a good opportunity to make that happen. Been a lot of press about, oh, they're giving themselves over an extra year. Well, if in fact the 722 passes, there would be an election in March and a runoff in April. So that really the end of April. So that's really just about a 6-month addition of time. It's not a year. So as opposed to the state fix versus the local bill, should it pass, it would give about an extra 6 months to do all of those things that the council felt like they didn't want to be rushed. They want to hear from the public. They want to hear from your group. Your group may have other recommendations that may be able to be considered, but it would be very, very difficult to do that if they had, you know, only 2 months to consider it. So that's basically the reason that they approach. and certainty, getting the bonds, getting the numbers right, and allowing you to do your work. And the fact that it was going to be every 2 years thereafter, I think that this was, again, the opportunity to go ahead and get that done. And that they believe that it would, there would be a lot more people who would come out and vote. Now, Jerry can elaborate on this too. There's a lot of questions about why did you get rid of the runoff? There is no runoff for November elections. So if you want a two-step election for a November election, there's potentially a primary, have a primary, but that primary is in March. So for purposes of this local bill, if you had a primary in March, you really wouldn't need the local bill because you're going to be on the same schedule as you were for the state bill. So the council does have the authority. That's one of the things that they could change in the future. So if we could get through 2022 and thoughtfully have lines and bond and all of the things that we've talked about, then, and everyone wanted to add a primary in the future, that's a possibility. It doesn't mean it has to be forever. It's just for purposes of this year, the nonpartisan plurality made the most sense. And I think, Jerry, isn't that the most common method?
Right. There are about 30 municipalities that have even year elections. Most of them are plurality in November. All the municipalities in Stanley and Surrey County and a lot of them Buncombe. Asheville has a nonpartisan primary in March with an election in November. Mount Airy was just moved to that system yesterday, or rather last Thursday, primary in March. Winston-Salem and Lincolnton have partisan elections where they vote in the primary in March, partisan primary as opposed to nonpartisan, and then election in November. So election in the primary is the most common method of electing school boards in North Carolina. About half of them elect their school board on a nonpartisan basis in the primary. March of 22, for instance, Durham County School Board is on the ballot in March of 2022, as is Orange County. So there's a hodgepodge of anything, but election and runoff doesn't work in the even year November election. You can't have it 4 weeks earlier because absentee ballots go out at Labor Day for the general election. And if you had it 4 weeks later, the statute doesn't even allow that as a current option. But if you did, it would mean having a runoff over Thanksgiving weekend. So I'm not sure if that's particularly desirable, even if it was legal.
And there's been a number of municipalities, I was going to say, in recent years that have gone to even years. When was Winston? 2016, maybe? Asheville was around 2016. Mount Airy just did it. I think all of the, Mount Airy said all of the Surrey County ones are going to even years. So it's kind of something that has been happening around the state. Is that correct, Jerry?
Yes, there's been a sort of steady movement. I think we've got 30 or so. The only one that moved to the even year and then moved back was High Point about a decade ago. They went to even and then back to odd. But generally, the progression is toward even year elections, largely because of turnout and expense, those two different factors. And of course, there's always local political judgments, et cetera, that surprise factor into all sorts of things. Legislators have generally, there's been a general push from a lot of legislators toward even year elections. I think 94 of the 115 school board elections are in the even numbered year, or maybe 100 of the 115.
Hey, Jerry, what's it's not in your information, but if you know, what's the drop off when there is a runoff? I assume there's further drop off in the non-odd year election and between the general and the runoff?
Well, if you're talking about municipal, the last example in Wake County is the runoff in 2017 for mayor. I think the turnout was slightly higher in the runoff than in the first election. For statewide elections, if you're looking at a second primary, which is getting particularly rare since we have a 30% cutoff, it varies. Some years the runoff has had lower turnout in the original, sometimes it's higher. Really depends on how controversial the particular runoff would be. You know, there could be a US Senate primary runoff in 2022. There might be some local ones. There might be none. I mean, it could be that if Raleigh was in March, that it would be there with a lot of other things. In the runoff in April, you know, Raleigh might be the only thing on the ballot, for example, or maybe not. We won't know. We won't know when the city council runoff would be, either April 26th or May 12th, until a few days after the March primary, which is annoying to election officials. We'd rather have it all standardized one particular day in advance to be able to plan polling places and stuff like that, but that's not under our control.
Well, let me,
Jared,
go ahead.
Jared, how you doing? This is Justin Sutton.
Hey, Justin.
Good. Thank you so much for your contribution. This is tremendous work and tremendous effort on your part. I just have I guess a personal opinion I'd offer up for consideration by the group. I know that municipal and local elections are largely about visibility and presence and public engagement. But one thing, and I know our charge is to come up with recommendations on how to increase voter participation and voter engagement in the next election cycle. But have we, or is there any data that considers how, and it may not be able to capture this data, but how the public is able to access candidates per se, and how they come up or formulate their opinion or thoughts on each particular candidate. I know, for instance, in my own personal experience running, I was excluded from a lot of forums and debates, simply because I was, my political affiliations is independent, and and a lot of these public displays or public forums, that's really the only time or the only opportunity for the public to engage with its candidates, whether it be city council or mayoral. So I wonder if there's, I guess, what is your thought or what is your perception on that, the public's access? Because that is a key portion in how the voter comes up with or decides on who they essentially want to select as their next candidate. And also if they even come out to the polls to vote in an election per se.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to quantify that. We know that, the turnout in an even year November election is about 6 times higher than it is in a municipal election. Yes, there's a lot more noise. How do candidates reach out? Candidate forums. I mean, there's obviously trade-offs between having 5 times as many voters and having a lot of noise in the background from other races, political parties, etc. The Raleigh city election, the way the ballot structure is, will be at the bottom right column of the back page. So it'll be relatively easy to find. It'll be the absolute last thing on the back side of the ballot with school board right up above it. And soil conservation supervisor right above that. So it's not buried in the middle of the ballot for whatever that's worth.
Right.
So
Well,
let me bring us, go ahead, Justin, I'm sorry.
I guess my suggestion would be if one opportunity is provided to a certain number of candidates running, I think it should be provided across the board. And I think that should be just the general consensus in terms of how a candidate expresses himself, him or herself, and how he engages with the public at any forum that's put on by any interest group or the media at large.
So we're in a interesting situation because this topic was planned before we knew council was going to take this action because they took this action yesterday afternoon. So I think that we can, and I guess I'm asking for input from the study group members, this decision to move forward has been made by council. So this bill will go to the General Assembly and presumably it'll get voted up or down. There's empirical evidence that's pretty clear that that will increase, you know, if it goes to even number years, voter turnout will increase. We can continue talking about kind of the voter turnout. We can talk about ways to, that turnout isn't necessarily the same thing as engagement. So we can continue this discussion kind of in the context of, are there other things that we might want to recommend to council in terms of voter engagement, voter education, so people are aware of what's going on, or we can kind of hold this with the understanding of what's going on and talk about what was our next topic, which would be talking about the size of council. And I'm open to the group's thoughts, comments, direction.
Yeah, Eric, I think it makes sense for us to, at least for today's discussion, assume that this statute is going to go through the legislature. We can talk through other ideas around increasing voter education and engagement and turnout that don't have anything to do. And if the final version that the legislature passes, or if it does not pass the proposals in front of it, we can revisit this discussion of the timing of elections in our next meeting. But it seems like at the moment we should talk about some other ideas.
Jerry, I see your hand.
Yeah, one thing to add. Senate Bill 722 is basically one-time even year election, if you could view it as a lab experiment on turnout if you want, whereas I think the city council's pending request would be a permanent change, at least as permanent as anything is in terms of the legislature.
And I think to Catherine's point, whatever is going to happen fairly quickly. And so I think maybe putting a kind of a placeholder on this topic, let that play out, and then we can come back to it, because I don't see that our work overall is going to be done before that bill is acted on one way or the other. And so maybe we put a placeholder in this, start talking about our other agenda topic, and then give this bill some time to play out, and then we can figure out how to structure that further, that discussion, and it can include engagement and education of voters as well. Harvey, you got your hand up?
Yes, Eric, I think our task is to determine, or they asked us, how to increase voter participation. And the strategy that they've adopted and we've identified through our conversation with Jerry seems to work, which is to place the elections on the even number years. Now, if I were in control of things, I would have the county and the school board on the same schedule with the municipalities, but I don't know that I have got that control. So if our charge is to how do we get more people to the polls and not have the election determined by an increasingly narrower group of voters, it seems to me that the strategy that they've taken by asking for this local bill is something we should endorse based on the data that we've collected. We've had this conversation before, and we've all talked about increasing voter participation. Would there be money available to try and drive up interest? But the reality is that unless you've got big issues and some momentum going, you're going to be winding up with just a few affected voters who choose to come out. So it seems to me that our answer to their question is yes, a November vote is the most likely way that you're going to increase voter participation. And I can say that today, as well as I can say it 3 weeks from now or a month.
Well, my only point is that bill is pending, and it's I mean, or it will be. It's going forward. I would rather hold our conversation because theoretically, I mean, I assume that the city has a good sense of what the outcome is going to be, but it's not voted on. So, you know, they've done their decision, so we're not going to have any more impact on it. If for some reason that bill fails or the politics of it shift, then our recommendation is not going to matter because they've already, you know, in order to move it to even years, it takes a local bill. So our recommendation isn't going to make a difference in that regard. But if it failed, we still have work to do in terms of, okay, General Assembly didn't agree with the city. So now we're back to off-year elections subject to Senate Bill 722. What can we do going forward to generate voter turnout in the situation we now find ourselves in? That's my only point. Now, if folks are ready to, you know, we haven't had a full discussion of other ways to engage and inform the electorate. So I don't know that if folks are ready to endorse this and say this is the right thing and we're okay with it, I mean, that's okay with me. I'm not going to stop us, but I'm also not sure we've had a full and complete discussion of this topic beyond, yes, empirically, more people will vote if we move elections to even years. So having said that, is there sense from others how they want to handle this from our members?
I would just say, I think that if what Harvey is saying is in fact the consensus of the group, that it certainly would be something council would want to hear. If it's not, then I suppose you can table it. But if that is based on Jerry's, I think that would be worth communicating.
Again, I'm fine with that. Are folks, I mean, I want to hear from everybody. If folks are comfortable with, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be our full and complete recommendation in that regard. I mean, again, I don't think you can argue that if elections are moved to even years, more people will vote. I mean, it seems to me that's you can't debate that fact. So
yeah, Eric, I guess that was one thing I would like to add is I would still like us as a group to give some consideration to other opportunities to continue to build that, whether it's renter engagement or general education and awareness, those kinds of things. So for me, it's kind of a yes and.
And I like that. I mean, I'm comfortable, you know, I don't have any problem if fundamentally the idea is to get more folks to vote. This is a way to do it. So I'm fine with that. I do think that for me, it would be a yes, and what else can we do? Because I don't know about you all, but in my discussions with citizens in my community, people are woefully undereducated about local issues and things that are going on in local government. And somebody that, for me, that's always amazing because I'm just kind of involved in it a lot. But I think we, as a community, have work to do in terms of, you know, helping citizens learn, you know, reducing the amount of friction that people run into to learn about candidates and issues and local things that affect their everyday lives. So if we want to move this forward with some sort of endorsement, I'm fine with that. I don't want to foreclose additional discussion about kind of the engagement process and some of the things that Ashton has also mentioned. So Jerry, I think you have two fingers up.
Yep, I've got to exit in just a minute. I just want to emphasize, I have no position on when the election should be. It's the job of the Wake and Durham County Board of Elections to conduct whatever election date is set by the legislature in the city and send the city the bill for it in accord with the city and county budgets.
Well,
Jerry,
we
I've got a
understand.
question I've got a question for Jerry before you leave.
Yes.
Did I hear you say that if we went to a November, we'd have a March primary? So one of the things that we would be looking at, is that correct?
No, Robin indicated that one option would be like Asheville does, would be to have a March primary and a November election, but I don't believe that's what the city council is
That
asking.
is not, no, the council did not, the council is not, well, Robin, I'll let you, I'm not going to speak
Yeah.
for you.
Okay, here's the deal. For 2022, there is no question that, I mean, they've asked that they be changed to plurality, which is a winner take all for 2022 for sure. They do not want to in 2022. That would be in March, and so there would be no reason for us to say, oh, we don't want to, we want to run in, we don't want to run in March because we don't have enough time, and then go run in March. What I'm saying is, should in 2024, should this bill pass after 2022, if people, the council, whatever, wanted to change and go to a primary in future years, that is one of the things that the council has the ability to change without the permission of the General Assembly. Does that make sense?
So then,
I think a primary in 2022 makes any sense. So that's not what the bill says.
so do they have, and Jerry, maybe you can answer this. Do they have flexibility on when that primary may take place, or do they have to do it on the same time as everybody else?
If a municipality chooses a nonpartisan primary method in the even numbered year, under the state law, it will be the same time as the county/state/federal primary.
Which is March or May.
So if one of the things we'd be interested in is some focus on municipal issues, the primary would be a spot for setting that table. And then the general election in November would be a way to finish off the meal, as a thought. Because I don't like the fact that the county and the school board are on a different schedule than we are. And I do think it gets more people out to have their voices heard than having the thing driven by smaller and smaller and smaller groups of voters. So that's, and if that's what council asked us, I'm comfortable with at least saying to them clearly that voters voting on the even number is going to get you more participation, and you don't have to spend a dime less. You probably a dime more. You can probably spend a dime less to make that happen.
Well, we've been operating on the consensus model, and we're not going to change that now. So the question, I guess, for me would be to the group, are we, and I don't want anybody to be shy, because as I said, we're in this all together, and we're going to work through it if we're not all together. As I understand it, the local bill that's pending is going to move, and I think it's permanently, city council elections to even years. And then once that happens, the state law that allows cities to have the flexibility to make modifications within that framework to various aspects of their charters, that still applies. So things could be changed after 2022, you know, under the general state law that we're operating under now. So if folks are comfortable endorsing this effort by city council to move elections to November of even years, I'm fine calling that question with the understanding that we will still continue to discuss ways to educate voters and reach out to voters, and particular voters that may not be regular voters, regardless of overall turnout. So I'm laying that out there. I don't want to ask for a motion, but do people, if you want to weigh in, are people comfortable with that now? And if so, that's fine. If we're not, then I see people doing yeses in their check boxes. I don't know how to do that, but if people want to raise their hand, if we're comfortable doing that today, raise your hand, yes. If you want to wait for a while, then. So Justin, I haven't heard from you. So it looks like I think everybody said they're okay endorsing that effort by council to move elections to November of even years. Do we want to talk about the primary versus plurality issue? We don't need to deal with that right now, but we could.
Eric,
Well, I will tell you, the council hasn't even dealt with it. They haven't even thought about dealing with it. So
Okay.
that's
Eric,
really,
if
I
I
mean, we
might.
just need to get through this year.
Okay. Harvey?
I don't know that we have to. I think the question to us was, what's the, how can we increase voter participation? I think we can safely say, based on our deal, that the single best way for that to take place is by being on the same schedule as all the other elections. And I don't know that we have to endorse it as the be all end all. Like I said, if I were in charge, I'd change the system entirely. But if they're trying to get increased voter participation, my goodness, this is the obvious way when you look at a 5-6 time increase.
Well, I hear you. I'm asking for, we are making recommendations. So is our recommendation, are we comfortable making a recommendation? I mean, they've got something out there. So they got a bill that's going to be filed or is filed. My view is, if we're going to make a recommendation, we need to endorse that effort, not be kind of, that's what's there, which is narrow, moving elections to November of even years for the city council. It sounded like everybody was okay with that. Are we okay making that recommendation to council?
I think
And
that's,
maybe we are,
I think that's what everybody voted on.
okay. I just want to make
If you
sure.
could bottle that up with what you got on the 16th, I think that council would appreciate it.
Okay, so let me also kind of be clear, because I want to make sure that's going to be our position. And I may have used some poorly thought through language, not endorsing the local bill, because one, we don't know what's in the local bill, and the local bill could change, and council could put something in it that we aren't aware of. And so I want to be clear on the record here that we're not endorsing the local legislation. We are recommending that for the purposes of increasing voter turnout, moving elections to even year, November of even years is an excellent way to do that. Is that an acceptable recommendation? I think that, okay. So if I don't hear anybody objecting, that will be our recommendation. And we can add that to our recommendations we've made already.
And
With
Eric,
the understanding, now I do have to say that Councillor Weeks and Nirvana Crew had to drop off. So I want to at least give them the benefit and the opportunity to weigh in, but we'll hopefully they'll be on the same page as well. Justin?
Well, yes, and I guess I'm along the lines of saying, or against an official endorsement of the local bill, but in our report, as long as we are providing the data and the likelihood of this recommendation increasing voter participation in an even year, I fully support that effort and that endeavor.
So my thinking is that that's our narrow recommendation, because we don't know what's in the bill. We're not going to endorse the bill. We're not going to endorse council's action in terms of that specific legislation, just that we recommend moving the elections to November of even numbered years in order to increase voter turnout.
There's a higher likelihood of voter turnout in the even years.
Yes. Okay. So we've got that. We'll retain further discussion about, and maybe not for today, further discussion about voter education and, engaging voters. We can continue that discussion. But I think it's one, so I think we can continue that part of the discussion, or we can kind of start talking about the issue of the size of council and that, because we really haven't had much discussion on that.
Can I just clear one thing up so nobody gets confused? I think what you're saying is you're not speaking to the local bill at all.
Correct.
It's not like you're saying, I'm not endorsing the local bill. You're saying we are not speaking to the local bill. We don't have
Correct.
a bill at all, but that one piece, which is will voter turnout increase during even years? Based on the data you have, the answer to that is yes. And that's where you are. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I just didn't want it to be read that you had made any decision on the local bill.
Yeah. Since we haven't seen it, we're not endorsing something we haven't seen. So, okay. So would you like to kind of just start and get entering into the discussion about the size of council and potential changes, or do we want to talk more about voter engagement? We've got a little time. So what's the pleasure of the group? Catherine?
If the group is interested, I've been doing some research with the National League of Cities and some other groups about other ways of also increasing voter engagement and turnout. So I have 2 suggestions that we could talk about, or I could hold them till next week if people want to move on to the size of council discussion.
Either one is fine with me. We're in it. Ashton, I know this is kind of something you're interested in. Do you want to move forward on that today, or do you want to shift over?
I don't have strong feelings either way, but it feels like we're kind of already in that vein. So it makes some sense to me to keep moving forward in it. But if there's a more urgent need to talk about the size of council, that's fine too.
Okay. I mean, I don't see that as being an urgent need. So Catherine, if you want to share what you have, and then we'll keep moving on.
Yeah, so I had 2 thoughts kind of based on some of the stuff that I've been looking into, which I didn't think to circulate any of this research and data before today, but I can do so after for people to review for next time. One of the things that is increasingly common in a lot of the different advocacy groups that focus on municipal governments, good governance practices, and local election voter turnout is the need for the activity of council and the city's engagement efforts to not simply be election related. So really what that means is like to have it be outside of just the 2 months that kind of precede an election. And the thing that a lot of cities are starting to do is actually create full-time civic engagement staff whose job it is to engage with local groups, develop civic engagement and education efforts through libraries and city services and all these different kinds of things. And if I think this could be interesting, I think it could be an interesting suggestion to council to say, if elections get moved to even numbered years permanently going forward, we already know that that's a significant cost savings to the city. Why not redirect some of that money to a position, to an office of say 3 people whose job it is to be civic engagement staff, and it is their job and it's their only job to work on those kinds of relationships between the government and citizens and to develop programming around these issues. So that's one of the ideas that's pretty common in the research that I think is interesting. The other,
let me stop you for 1 second. The city in this budget that they just passed, they had already created, or they were talking about creating, an office of community engagement, and they formalized it, and I think they authorized two positions. I see, and so they are moving down that road, but I don't know that they've thought as far into it as you have. So I like that idea. Maybe we can craft some, assuming the group agrees, some language about, offering suggestions and focus areas for that department, because it's in the formative stages. So now would be a great time to, say, in addition to whatever this department is intended to do, we recommend it also, address A, B, and C. And if we think they need more staffing, given the cost savings, that might be an approach too. But I didn't know if you were aware of that, so I didn't want to cut you off, but they're at least moving in that direction.
Right. And I think that that's exactly where this kind of programming would happen. I think it could be useful to kind of flesh that out in some of our proposals to add into that group. The other
one thing to add there too, Catherine, is there's 3 full-time positions in the Department of Equity and Inclusion that'll be added too. So there might be some opportunity to, in our recommendations, tie all those things together.
Yeah, and the National League of Cities actually has a specific report on the equity and inclusion component of voter turnout and participation. Again, like there's just some really interesting data that's being put together by some of these groups that I think we could offer up to the thought process for it all.
Will you send the links? Will you send links
Yes.
out for that to us?
I will. Mhm.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The other thought that I had is about the problem that we frequently have with local elections, where you have that voter drop off, right? Where people become very familiar with top of ballot, federal and statewide candidates, elections, right? But as Justin was saying, getting a higher familiarity with your local candidates, with your local issues is a challenge. Obviously, council can't do anything about what private organizations do when they throw forums and host people. But one thing that we could do would be to look at the model that the State Board of Elections used for nonpartisan judicial races for several years and mailing a voter guide to every household in the state. So what the State Board of Elections did was they had for judicial races, a voter guide in which there was no editing, there was no editorializing. They would invite a candidate statement from every single judicial candidate to send in. And then the State Board of Elections would print just those statements. So there's no endorsements, it's fully nonpartisan. They didn't even proofread the things that were sent in. So like it was a low lift in that sense. And then that voter guide got sent to every household in the state. And I believe from what I was able to find, the State Board of Elections was able to print those voter guides for like 1/5 of a cent each. You just do it as like this mass kind of approach. And so something that the city could potentially do, again, with these cost savings would be to do something similar for the local races and to mail to every Raleigh household simply the candidate statement of everybody running for the different positions, maybe a write-up of whatever, if there is a bond on the ballot or something like that. And that way you would actually have every household, so presumably every voter in Raleigh, would at least know in advance of election day, in advance of actually seeing their ballot, who's on their ballot, who's running. They would have enough time to actually do some Googling, do some research of their own and figure that out. And if you also really wanted to increase the voting for local elections, also, you could include an absentee ballot application in that voter guide, not fill it out, none of those things. You just include that particular resource. That increased a lot of people's sense of familiarity with judicial candidates, particularly people who were not lawyers. And I know that there were.
Are you saying that people weren't familiar with the judicial candidates? every district court judge on the ballot. Come on.
Yeah, I know, right? This is people's favorite races, voting for judges.
Well, Robin,
all the lawyers laugh at this.
Robin, is there anything that would, assuming money's no object and those things, is there anything that would prevent the city from doing something like that? I mean, are they authorized under the statutes to do that, or maybe we need to look at that? Because I think it'd be an interesting idea, and but I
don't know. I'll just ask Brandon and Janie if they know of any legal reason.
Yeah, I just wasn't, I don't know how. I think it's a great idea, assuming the city wants to, is open to it. I just want to make sure that we don't get excited about some idea and then find out that Asheville tried to do it 10 years ago and got sued or something. So,
well, I guess you just maybe like keep running risk. Just send us, specifically that, and we'll just take a look at it, make sure there's nothing that jumps out of it. I mean, I didn't write every single thing down, so that would be good if we get just a summary and we'll take a look at it.
And I can pull the statute that guided the State Board of Elections publication of the judicial voter guide, and we could use that as a model and kind of discussions going forward.
And that's not endorsing anybody. You're just talking about.
No, it's not. Basically, it was just soliciting candidates to send in their own statement about themselves. Nobody on the state board side here, the city side, edits, endorses, nothing like that.
Catherine,
I remember seeing some typos that I was kind of shocked at. That that you're running for office.
Typos.
Yep.
Yeah.
Catherine, I'll add those links to the minutes as well. So
okay,
send them off.
I will send those around. Yeah.
And I think visibility is an issue because, you know, I saw Justin at one of the candidate forums, and no knock on him, but if you aren't a crazy person that attends all those things, you know, I wouldn't have probably heard about him because I don't recall you doing mailers and things like that, and those get lost in the shuffle anyway. So,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of approach at least gives everybody, not on equal footing, but at least it gets them all up the first step, so to speak, you know, in an election. Ashton, I think I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just fine. I was just going to say, if we are organizing something to check the legality of being able to do these kinds of things, it might be helpful to build a list of all the kinds of things we'd want to check. You know, for example, the city has text message alert systems. Are we allowed to use that to publish information about elections coming up and those kinds of things? Like, what are the other limitations for existing outreach opportunities?
And if I think, yeah, I guess the other way to ask that question is, I mean, I assume if the concept that Catherine has laid out turns out to be legal under state law, I guess there'll be multiple other objective ways to, if you can do that through mail, you probably can do it in lots of other ways as long as it probably just has to reach everybody. That's going to be your biggest problem, is being purely objective, and somehow, you know, the way it goes, it probably can't be something that people opt into. Instead, if I had to guess, but that's I'm playing junior lawyer on that, and I don't know anything about election law. So, Harvey.
Just on the whole engagement piece, because I kind of like where this conversation is going. Robin, has the council hired a consultant to look at how to do that, and have
how to do what?
a consultant to help them on engagement strategies?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
They
boy,
did.
that's a whole
Mickey
nother-
Fern.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They have.
Yeah,
He did. It's been a long time, probably about a year on it, and did his final report recently. So Mickey Fern is his name. And
So perhaps that report could be shipped to everybody here. We could take a look at that and see if that percolates. And I like the stuff that Catherine's dug up and Ashton is suggesting. It would be nice to look at the full panoply of options that have been discussed. And if, Ashton, you've got any others, particular ones that you've picked up somewhere along the line, let's get those into the queue, and then we can sort of see what makes sense.
Yeah, and sending us links that can easily be included, because when we post the minutes of these meetings, those staff makes those links hot, so citizens will also be able to easily access anything that we're looking at as well. So
yeah, I think it would be interesting to know, and a comprehensive list may be difficult, but probably shouldn't, but where are all the ways and places that the city already touches and communicates with citizens? And so, you know, maybe we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just leaning on some things that are already in place to share nonpartisan, you know, just awareness kinds of information and messaging.
could we, Robin, could we ask, is it Damien maybe if he's willing to come to our next meeting? Or
it might be Damien, it might be Linda Jones. I mean, I think that's probably we probably need to reach out to Lou and explain, you know, what you want, because the city is constantly engaged on all sorts of front. I mean, Damien's like the communications person, but they're all, you know, getting information to neighborhoods and groups and all sorts of things that are going on. And I think Lou could probably coordinate who the people are that would be best to report what's already going on.
Would the group like to maybe have the appropriate people come to the next meeting and spend 10 or 15, 20 minutes kind of talking about that? Because they've obviously, the folks that have struggled with it, they might be kind of to Ashton's point, saying, yeah, you'd think that was a good idea, but here's why it's a total waste of time, and then other things we may not have thought of. So if we can arrange that, would that be worth looking into for our next meeting?
I'd be interested
Okay.
in that. Also, if it were possible, even if it's just their kind of anecdotal response, be interested in knowing the reach and of some of those outlets already. One thing I do want to be cautious of is to lean on Mickey Fern's analogy, making sure that we're not targeting green people with green people messaging and continuing to reinforce this idea of who's involved. The people who are signed up for text message alerts, the people who get email notifications are already the people who are tuned in. And so how are we expanding our reach? So it'd be good to have a sense of where those communications go.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of times people that are engaged, and they're the last people you need to actually engage further with. And so I know the city's has made and is making a much bigger effort to reach out to renters, because in terms of land use decisions, everything was oriented towards property owners. And by definition, renters aren't property owners. And so I know they've been trying to engage more with those folks in the city.
We've already changed the UDO to include notice to renters.
Yes, yeah. And so I know that's been an issue. Other things so the things I'm hearing are, we've got some information that people are going to send, we're going to share, get in the minutes. I'll talk to Lou to see who the right staff folks are that kind of do engagement, communication, and arrange to see if we can have them come to our next meeting to give us some insight. And we'll continue this discussion next time. Are there other things you'd like us to look at? And we still have time. I'm not trying to end the meeting. Other specific tasks that would be helpful.
I'd be interested in knowing about language translation services as well, and just sort of what the language makeup is across the city. If we're doing a guide like Catherine talked about, something like that, do we need to also account for translation into one language or two language or 5 languages, something like that? And then I guess the other thing that I think it would be interesting for this group to think about would be how we can engage the business community to create awareness amongst employees and residents in the area, and how we can engage our faith communities as well, again, for just driving awareness of upcoming elections and who's running.
Robbie, were you raising your hand or swatting a fly?
I was not raising my hand.
Okay. The risks of being outdoors. Other comments on this? I think we have things we want to look at, other discussion topics in terms of engagement, because I wouldn't mind touching on the council size issue, just to get a sense of where we are and our thinking on that is. But I don't want to cut off the discussion. I think generally what I'm hearing is we want to explore ways to ensure that we expand the voter base, who's voting, and then secondly, provide more information to capture people that might not regularly vote, and figure out how to engage those folks and get them engaged, and just also basic awareness and education of everyone that votes, because I know that I'm always shocked. I know a lot of people that make every effort to vote, but they don't necessarily, they're not as aware of actually what they're voting for, as at least personally I would like them to be, and I don't know about others, but and it's hard if you don't know, how to figure out what's, in a bond package, and lesser known candidates that aren't necessarily well financed, to try to make sure that people at least have some exposure to all of their options. So I think that we have plenty to look at and work on. All right, so let's just turn for a little bit for folks to just kind of share their general thoughts on. Today we have a council of 8. It's been that way since I think 72. Is that right? I can't remember what the. It's been an even number. We can go as high as, and I asked Robin, we can have 12 council members and a mayor, so it can be 13, or is it's 11 plus a mayor? So the
Mayor is the council consists of the council members and the mayor.
Okay, the statute was a little unclear to me. So we can, and I'm not suggesting this at all, but you could add, we can go as high as 12. We have 8 today, that's 4. I will mention that Durham, I think 10 or 15 years ago, reduced the number of counselors they had. They had a similar process to what we're going through, and they had reduced the number. And I don't remember, I think it was the full 12, and they reduced it to whatever our spreadsheet shows they have today. But I'm just interested in other people's thoughts on our size relative to the data we have, and what other folks think about it.
I'll start. I think for me, the number one priority, if changing the size of council, would be to get an odd number so that you don't have the possibility of a tie. Of course, there's lots of ways you could do that, I suppose. The simplest way to do it would be to add 1 at-large member. I'm not married to that option, but that would be my priority, would be to see that we have an odd number of people on council.
Other thoughts and comments? I'm sorry, I'm pulling up the spreadsheet so I can look. So does anybody else think should we stay the same? Are folks happy with the size we have now?
Well, this is Justin Sutton, Eric. I guess my only comment or opinion would be, or is our system really broken now currently, and what would be the benefit of expanding the council size? I think we just look at that. We can look at that more in depth, and if we want to continue the conversation amongst the group, but do we really have a broken system now, and what should we do about it, or is it really beneficial to expand?
And I think that's a good way to look at it. Is council broken? I don't recall, Robin, we don't have, and obviously we have a mayor that votes. I don't know if we even could get the statistics, but I don't recall, we don't have many tie votes.
A lot of tie votes. No, I wouldn't say a whole lot of them. And I will just point out that under 168-101, there's different. I'm just saying that sorry, they're texting me to death from the general assembly. The 12 council members, you can actually, one form, and some cities I've represented have done that. They pick the council picks the mayor from themselves. So that's just further, sort of proof that the 12 is the number, because you can pick the mayor from within that. But there are not a lot of ties. I think there are people who think that having an even number has certain advantages, and obviously there's an advantages to having a, because you never have a tie. So anyway,
but it's not been you haven't noted it to be a significant stumbling block to getting things done, to the extent, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
It just depends on who's on the council. Right now, I would say No, in years past, there've been a number of tie votes, I mean, I'm thinking, the councils.
Yeah, last council.
But the last council tied, okay.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So it just depends on the makeup. So if you go to odd, you certainly solve that every time. So I have to jump off for a minute. Brendan, can you fill in for me for a little bit there?
Well, we appreciate, I know you're busy, so thank you for your time.
I'm just going to turn my camera and my sound off. I'll be back, but Brendan, yep, can jump on. I'll be here, but I just got to deal with a couple other things.
Okay, thank you.
Brandon. Good work, Brandon. I was afraid you weren't going to respond.
Oh, thank you.
I think I think this also, the size and the makeup goes to one of our points we talked about, relevant points in terms of the 4 years and the staggering is, what do we want this council, not this one, but Raleigh's council to be focused on in terms of, planning for the future. And Diana, your hand is raised. Do you want to add? I can't see your face, but.
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, what did you want to add? Sorry.
Yeah, my concern, what really has gotten me engaged in this and want to be engaged in this is mainly because of District C. District C is growing so fast and so big that one council person, I think it's a lot of responsibility on that one person. I know we spoke about it earlier on and, looking at maybe the districts has to be, split up. I don't know, but that is one thing that I would like to start out conversation with is adding more, especially around the District C district, if that makes sense.
Well, as I understand the law, when the census data is finally here, all districts have to be rebalanced and they have to all have populations within 5% of each other. That's correct, Brandon? So, and I know that there's a sense, we all have a sense that some of these districts have, some have grown tremendously and are certainly don't fall within that 5% margin of error any longer. But they will all, regardless of what we recommend, the districts get rebalanced every 10 years, and that's what is going to happen, and they'll have to be within 5%. So while certainly District C has grown, everybody will be back to the same place after the rebalancing occurs. The question and the point that I think that I was trying to make was once we do that, at least for me, this is a question of what do I want the council to focus on and the incentives to be. And I think that it goes back to what we talked about with the 4-year term. I want council to really be taking and have the incentive to take the big picture strategic approach. Where are we looking for the entire city to grow and move? And what I find, the nature of district representatives is, a large land use case or the city putting a particular type of project, where are they going to park their trash trucks, those types of things, where are they going to invest money? Those take on they're very hyper local, and the incentive for a district representative, obviously by nature, is to represent their district, and those interests don't always align, in my opinion, with where the city's going, strategically. And so the tension for me is between, adding district representatives versus more, if you assume we're going to adding an at-large. So I kind of fall along the lines of where Robbie is, with if there's a sense of breaking the tie. My initial kind of instinct is another at-large member to make it 8. But again, that's just kind of my gut reaction, and I would encourage everyone to look back at the spreadsheet data, because when you think about if you add another district, I guess the folks that support that, and I'm not trying to put words in Diana's mouth, I'm talking more about community-wide. The idea is that there'll be fewer people in the district, and so that it'll be easier to reach their representative. With the city growing so fast, if you look at our, that number and you say, okay, right now we have 5 district representatives and our population is close to 500,000, adding one additional district representative, to me, it makes only a marginal difference in the number of citizens in that particular district, if that makes sense. It would reduce the geographic size of the district to a certain amount. I don't know how much that is. And if that's important to folks in terms of, council members, traveling within their district, that could make a difference. But I'm just raising those points for consideration. Others have thoughts on it?
Some other things to consider. It'd be interesting to know what other kinds of costs are incurred. And obviously on the scheme of the city budget, they're probably not enormous, but when you start adding additional counselors and then the support staff that needs to benefit with that, and all of the kinds of things that go into funding additional roles, that just would be an interesting data point to look at.
It's been so long, I don't know, they'll have to figure that one out. They haven't added one, but that's certainly a valid consideration. Other thoughts? Justin, I don't know if you weighed in or not. I forgot.
Well, I'll just say, with a step up in pay across the board, that should incentivize our counselors to do more within their communities. But yeah, nothing further. Just wanted to throw that proposal out, or that question out for the group, in analyzing our current system and the current state of how we govern with our current 7 counselors and the mayor.
Well, does anybody, are there people that are fine? I'm not wedded to expanding it. I'm kind of agnostic about it, but are folks comfortable with 8? I don't get a sense that there's a strong reaction. Diana, I think, has expressed the most strength towards a position. I don't know if others feel strongly one way or the other.
I think I'd like to explore a little bit more the need for a tie-break vote. I think I could kind of be persuaded either way on that one at this point. And that for me just looking at the numbers and how they compare to the cities that we've kind of pegged as our comparable cities and things like that, I don't necessarily feel like we need to add another council member based on representation numbers, but I would be interested to know kind of where the tie breaks need to happen.
It doesn't look.
Eric,
yeah, Harvey, go ahead.
On the tie break, from a practical standpoint, if a subject matter doesn't get a majority, that may reflect sort of an ambiguity in the community on a particular issue, and that isn't fundamentally bad. So I'm at the heart of this kind of inclined to having tiebreakers, but the flip side of that is maybe occasional standoff is useful dynamic within the group. And then when it gets to size, if we're going to go odd, I would lean towards at large rather than another district representative. And if people felt strongly about a district representative, now I'm up to 10 because I would want to have another at-large representative there to sort of balance out that conversation in terms of what the big picture issues. So I think we have to decide, you know, there are a lot of permutations in this discussion. And we may need more than the back end of this meeting to sort of get through all of that. But at least we're getting the stuff on the table.
Yeah, and I was not suggesting that today we try to make any sort of decisions. One, you know, and the other thing to just keep in the back of our minds as we do this, we may get to a point, and it's okay, that we say we couldn't reach consensus on this, and there were a variety of opinions. And what I don't want to do, at least, and we can, my personal view is, I don't want to get to where we take votes and say, okay, there were 4 people that wanted to add 1 at-large representative. There were, you know, 3 people that wanted to add 1 district. My preference would be either that we decide as a group, you know, this is the size we recommend to council, and this is within that how we think it should be broken down at-large versus district, or we report out, you know, there were numerous discussions and we considered numerous approaches, and the 10 of us were not able to reach consensus on an approach. And, you know, so again, I'm not suggesting that either, but that would not be, I wouldn't perceive that to be a failure of our, you know, on our part either, if that's where we end up, because there are so many different permutations of, you know, where we could come out. So other things to think about or data to look for before we end the call, so that we have what we think we need to continue having productive discussions in 2 weeks. Harvey, do you think you got enough clarity for the list items we need, and you and I can confer on that? And if we have questions for other members, when we make the ask to staff, we'll reach out directly.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with what we've got on this particular subject. If somebody has a burning sense of what they'd like to see, maybe they want to present a proposal in some way for us to consider. But I have, at this point, I've got a great deal of there's a term for not really giving a strong, I don't have a strong opinion.
You're agnostic.
Agnostic, that'll work. I think I have others, but nonetheless, that'll work.
I got a couple too, but.
So if there's a proposal that somebody want to put forward, that might be useful to take a look at before showtime. Otherwise, I think we can walk around the room on this a number of more times. On the stuff that we got today, if everybody gets me, and Catherine's already sent me some links, and if Robin digs up some of that stuff, we get that circulated, I think we're in good shape on that section of the conversation.
So, and I agree, you know, if folks do have specific approaches that they want us to consider, you know, bring those to the table next time, and we'll work through them, because yes, this has just got kind of a octopus, and it's got lots of arms, and we can nibble around on all of them, but we may not ever be able to kind of bring it to one point. So thank you for, yep, Ashton, you're on mute. You're muted, I think.
Thank you. Is my memory correct in that Raleigh prior to the 1970s was all at-large council members? And in that shift in the 70s is when districts were put into place, largely to ensure accurate representation from each region of the city.
That might have been
trying to look.
Early reports to us. I don't recall.
I'm here. I'm looking at Jerry's earlier information. There can be an even or odd number. The Raleigh Council was 7 members from 1947 to 1972. So,
Okay, I'll do some Googling. I thought, I have a memory somewhere that in districts were introduced in the 70s, but I can confirm that myself.
yeah, I don't have it right in front of me. It may be in there, but I can't
No big
see
deal.
it. Anything else? All right, well, I will look forward to seeing everybody in Harvey.
We were working to get the interim report done. We're going to get something before council. We can go back to every other week and we're good in terms of timing on the rest of this conversation.
I think so. I mean, we stick with the 2 weeks. I think it sounds like we have time. I don't want to backslide on that because I would like, and spread out the meetings since we're kind of in a rhythm. But I don't think we need any special meetings to move this along unless people feel the need to do that. Unless I hear anything else, I'm going to call this meeting to a close. I appreciate everybody's time and again, commitment to keeping us moving forward. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Eric.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Eric.